Over the last few years, I've been grappling with theoretical understanding of my role as a law teacher, and what I've come up with is a theoretical framework for the teaching of law at South African universities today. I call this framework Transformative Legal Education, TLE in short, and it is what I consider law teachers can and must do in order to achieve the aims of transformative constitutionalism. At its core, the framework draws upon a number of insights from different disciplines to guide the teaching of law. In setting up this framework, I focus on three basic elements of education, namely 1, the subject matter or discipline being taught, here law, 2, the act of teaching, pedagogy, and 3, the student. I focus on contemporary insights in each of these areas, and in particular on fundamental shifts in each field to frame the teaching of law. In this presentation, I will set up the theoretical framework of TLE by focusing on each of the three dimensions. Firstly then, the discipline being taught, in our case, law. Many scholars have pointed to the fundamental shift in legal culture envisaged by our new constitutional dispensation. Morainic talks of a shift from a culture of authority to a culture of justification. And Karl Clare has influentially coined the term transformative constitutionalism, referring to the process of social transformation through legal means in terms of the Constitution. Integral to transformative constitutionalism is the open engagement with substantive values in justifying legal outcomes. However, Clare notes a disconnect between the prevailing legal culture in South Africa and the commitment of the Constitution to social change, arguing that, despite the substantively post-liberal and transformative aspirations of our Constitution, our legal culture is still a highly conservative one. South African lawyers instinctively rely on a legal methodology that places relatively strong faith in the precision, determinacy, and self-revealingness of words and text, with little emphasis on values and policy. Instead, Clare calls for the development of a legal culture that embraces the normative framework put forward by the Constitution in its methodology. This involves not only overt substantive reasoning, but also recognition of the possibilities for creativity in applying and developing the law to meet the aims of social transformation. So, what do the fundamental changes in our discipline mean for the teaching of that discipline? Firstly, in substance, new areas of law must be accommodated in the curriculum, and the curriculum adjusted to reflect the new paradigm based on a supreme justiciable constitution. Secondly, students should be educated not only in the new substance of the law, but also in the new legal method or reasoning mode. As the new constitutional dispensation calls for a substantive mode of legal reasoning, matters of morality and policy, even politics, can no longer be excluded from legal analysis. This means that such matters should also enter the law lecture hall. It requires much greater emphasis on the context in which law operates, the society that it intends to regulate, and in our case, to transform. Consequently, there is a much greater need for an interdisciplinary approach to legal education. Law must be presented not as a collection of distinct branches, each existing within its own silo, but in an integrated fashion that reveals the connections between the various branches, especially in relation to shared constitutional normative value system that underlies it all. Secondly, much more emphasis must also be placed on the integration of law with other disciplines. Obvious examples being economics, philosophy, political science, and sociology. Without skills in these areas, law students will not be equipped to engage in the substantive mode of reasoning required within transformative constitutionalism. And perhaps most importantly, we should foster creativity. As Clare notes, our constitutional drafters could not have envisaged that we will transform our society in light of the Constitution with reliance on the same legal rules and legal sensibilities of the pre-constitutional era. Our constitutional transition challenges us to be creative, to imagine new ways of doing things in law, In turn, this challenges legal education to foster creativity. We must train lawyers to be innovators under the Constitution, not simply technicians. However, the biggest challenge for legal education lies not in what we teach, but in how we teach. As law teachers, our legal culture manifests in the way we teach, and it is thus our teaching methodology that we need to critically engage with in order to align what we do with the transformative aspirations of our Constitution. This is difficult, for as Claire notes, these characteristic rhetorical strategies and professional norms seem normal and obvious to us. And in the absence of critical self-reflection and or transformative experience, appear to be natural and fixed, rather than contingent and culturally situated as they in fact are. We may thus not be aware of the significant influence that these practices have on what we do in class, and hence their impact on law graduates' perception of the law and their role in society. Significantly, these practices can have a limiting effect not only on law graduates' inclination to drive transformation, but indeed also on their ability to be innovators under the Constitution. This may seem very abstract, so let me look at a few more concrete examples of aligning pedagogy with transformative constitutionalism. If we want to bring home the shift from a culture of authority to a culture of justification, our pedagogy needs to reflect justification and not authority. We should ask ourselves what perception of law is instilled by a methodology that only involves a sage standing on a stage and imparting the law to a group of novices. What happens when law students, by and large, remain passive recipients of information? What view do students form of the law when they are relentlessly confronted with a pre-selected package of authoritative materials that they should simply learn by rote within a rigid curricular structure? What is conveyed by an assessment strategy that simply requires the replication of the views imparted as authoritative and rewards those that get it as close as possible to the original, or as one student recently remarked, effectively rewards plagiarism? In my view, such practices reflect and thus preserve a culture of authority. Transformative constitutionalism forces us to imagine a different methodology, one that enables students to actively participate in developing their own understanding of rules, that focuses the attention on the assumptions underlying legal rules and their normative makeup, and leave the black letter technical dimension to background learning, that encourages students to be critical and not simply accept a position because it is stated in an ostensibly authoritative source, and that enables students to imagine, also in radical terms, what the law could be, rather than simply knowing what it is. And finally, our methodology should be explicit. We should explain to our students why we do things the way we do, and be able to justify our methodological choices. By adopting such a pedagogy, we will be able to infuse a transformed vision of the law, as dictated by our Constitution, in the way that students become members of the legal community. This brings me to our second element in setting up transformative legal education, namely the act of teaching. The question here is whether there is a way to conceptualize a pedagogy that will enable us to effectively teach students in law and instill in them the new transformative aspirations of our discipline. Put differently, what options exist in educational theory that can help us construct a pedagogy that complements the fundamental shifts in our discipline? One of the most significant developments in theoretical views on learning in recent times has been the influence of constructivism. Perhaps the best way to capture the core of constructivism is the statement, knowledge is not found, but made. When one gains knowledge, one doesn't simply absorb some objective, fixed set of ideas. One learns or constructs knowledge by connecting new experiences to one's existing knowledge base. By doing so, one does not only add to the original knowledge base, but also restructure that pre-existing knowledge base. This subjective process of constructing knowledge happens not only at the individual level, but also within a particular socio-cultural context. Knowledge is thus temporary, developmental, socially and culturally mediated, and thus non-objective. Constructivism implies that teaching can no longer be viewed as a transmission exercise. That is, an activity in which a knowledgeable teacher transmits discrete bits of information to students who duly absorb it. Since learning can only occur through construction of knowledge, teaching must involve learners as active participants. The role of the teacher changes from that of the sole and authoritative holder of knowledge that must be imprinted on the blank slates of his students to the role of the facilitator that must guide students' own efforts at construction. Conversely, the learners' roles change from passive recipients of information to active knowledge constructors who are responsible for defending, proving, justifying, and communicating their ideas to the classroom community. Context accordingly becomes central to learning. At the individual level, a particular learner's context is determinative of her construction of the knowledge being taught. The class experience is thus only part of the learning process, with each student's own existing knowledge base and out-of-classroom experiences playing as big a role in knowledge construction. At the communal level, active engagement with a particular knowledge community defines learning. The richer students' engagement with the knowledge community is, the richer we can expect their learning to be. This again emphasizes the need for active student engagement. Here, constructivism aligns with notions of differentiated instruction that call for the use of different teaching strategies in order to enable students with distinct learning styles to effectively engage in knowledge construction. But it also implies that the richness of the knowledge community becomes a key consideration in effective teaching. Since students learn by engaging, not just on a vertical level with a teacher, but also critically on a horizontal level with peers, diversity in the learning community becomes a prerequisite for effective teaching. The potential of constructivist pedagogies for TLE should be evident. Such pedagogy emphasizes the central role of context and society. The learning process, including the knowledge constructed, is conceptualized as socially contingent. This pedagogy opens the door to contextual influences outside the strict confines of doctrine, and embraces an approach that draws attention to both the real-world grounding of a discipline and its relationship with other disciplines. It is a pedagogy that involves teaching in a much broader social context. In teaching law, constructivist pedagogy allows us to reflect the culture of justification and reject a culture of authority in the way we teach. In this pedagogy, not only can we tell students about the value of searching for justification for legal rules, as opposed to simply accepting their authority, we can also show students how it is done by teaching in that manner. Thus, when under constructivist pedagogy, the teacher is no longer the sole authoritative figure in the class, presenting students with ready-made knowledge for them to simply accept, but the process of learning occurs by students engaging with the materials and each other and forming their own constructions that they must justify within the knowledge community, guided by the teacher using a set of explicit and clear normative values. The students learn the law in the way that the law is supposed to function, as envisaged by transformative constitutionalism. Students learn that the authority of a position rests on the justification for that view and not on the command behind it. Eventually, constructivism focuses the attention on how learning occurs. In other words, how it is that through engagement in a teaching environment, a student can learn something. The result is that by adopting constructivist pedagogy, we can become much more sensitive to the underlying process of teaching and learning and its socio-cultural characteristics. We are forced to engage with our assumptions about knowledge, learning, and our students. This self-awareness can help us to unmask characteristic rhetorical strategies and professional norms in education that we may consider natural and fixed, but that are indeed socio-culturally contingent, and that may stand in the way of true transformation. But, as we've noted, since both constructivist pedagogy and transformative constitutionalism put emphasis on the context of both learning and the learner, and really call for an approach that puts the learner in the driver's seat, it becomes imperative for us to understand our students' knowledge world if we are to design effective learning experiences for them. This brings me to the third leg of transformative legal education, namely the students' knowledge world. In essence, my argument is that the digital revolution brought about by the advent of digital technologies such as the PC and in particular the internet has fundamentally changed our knowledge world. There seems to be rapidly growing consensus across a wide field of commentators that some rather big changes in dealing with knowledge are afoot. Leading scholars from diverse backgrounds, such as Oxford neuroscientist Baroness Susan Greenfield and Director of the Library of Alexandria, Professor Ismail Saragaldin, tell us that the impact of the digital revolution on our society, and in particular on the way we engage with knowledge, is not simply a quantitative change, but a qualitative one.
But I'm going to use a lot of slides, so fasten your seatbelt, as they say, and let's go. The main point I'm going to also emphasize is that the human brain is not only an amazing thing, we understand very little about it, but we know that we are very good at processing visual information, but also at being able to construct abstract ideas. And the ability to handle abstract symbols allowed us to invent writing. So, I mean, we have letters, then words, and then sentences, each of which is one level of abstraction built on the other, and we reinterpret them, and that allowed really knowledge to accumulate, broke conventional evolutionary processes. But I believe that now we are on the cusp of a profound knowledge revolution in the very structure of knowledge. And it's the biggest thing since the invention of writing. And I will marshal my evidence to that very big claim.
I'm also fascinated by what happens to the very young brain. And the reason I find it particularly fascinating and important to think about at the moment is because we know that the human brain is exquisitely evolved to adapt to the environment. And it follows, therefore, that if the environment is changing in an unprecedented way, then the brain will change in an unprecedented way. And what's very exciting about the human brain, people don't necessarily realize how unique and special they are. Even if you're a clone, that's to say an identical twin, you will have a unique configuration of brain cell connections, because as your brain grows after birth, it grows much more than a chimp's brain will grow. So these connections have the chance to mirror, to reflect, to be shaped, to be strengthened, to every way reflect your particular unique experiences. So this is what I call the mind, the personalization of the brain through this unique configuration of brain cell connections. And what happens is, first you grow up in this unconditional way, just saying how sweet, how fast, how cold and bright, and whatever comes in, because there's nothing to retaliate, whatever comes in will be unconditionally accepted by your brain, and it will shape and change things. But as you grow, so those pre-existing connections will form a basis for you to have an evaluative judgment about what's happening. So as things come in now, you can evaluate them and assess them against the checks and balances of the connections that are there already. And at the same time, that ongoing experience will upgrade and update the existing connections. So your brain is in this fabulous dialogue with every experience you have in the outside world. And that's what makes you so special. For 100,000 years that we've stalked the planet, no one has a brain, or rather a mind, like you do. It follows, therefore, that if we place this very sensitive and vulnerable and impressionable brain into a new environment, let's say one that's only two-dimensional and one that only offers two senses, sound and vision, then we might expect some different changes. That's not to say they're going to be universally good or universally bad, but most neuroscientists will say it's a given that the brain will adapt, therefore, and change, because that's what it is evolved to do. The area I like to research on here is what's happening in the brain when this goes on, and what kind of person will the next generation, what kind of people will they be?
This is a change that touches the very nature of our perception of knowledge. While the changes brought about by the digital revolution affect us all, a number of recent studies have indicated that they are more pronounced and fundamental in respect of a younger generation, famously called digital natives by Mark Prensky. For this generation, now entering higher education, the digital paradigm is the natural one. In this view, the engagement with information is always active and bidirectional, with the distinction between creator and recipient completely blurred. The interaction between different formats of information is commonplace, and the speed and mode of access through mechanisms such as hypertext and search engines are radically different from information in print format. Information is viewed as dynamic, never fixed or complete. The hold of Gutenberg on our intellectual world has certainly been broken by the advent of digital technologies. These changes in dealing with information result in a radically different paradigm of knowledge. Again, with reference to Sarah Golden, one can describe it as a shift from a bricks in a wall paradigm of knowledge to a more fluid vision, such as water flowing in a river. If our students' knowledge world or their paradigm of knowledge is radically different from what it was before, and importantly from ours, it follows that we cannot continue teaching in the way that we did before. Simply put, digital is this new generation's native tongue. In contrast, those of us that grew up before the advent of information technology, but find ourselves nevertheless also in this new digital world, are but digital immigrants, or, as one of my older colleagues recently noted, digital refugees. We may operate in the digital world and even accept that we cannot escape it, but we will never be native speakers of the language of technology. For us, the linearity of the old world of printed text will always remain the paradigm, and thus inform our point of departure. From an educational perspective, the real difficulty thus lies in the realization that our students are no longer little versions of us. This makes it particularly difficult for us to develop an understanding of our students' knowledge base and their experiences of knowledge construction and engagement for effective teaching. How can we design effective learning opportunities for students that may have a radically different conception of knowledge? But these challenges also bring opportunities. The uneven changes in students' knowledge world, both among themselves and compared to lecturers, bring the importance of diversity in teaching to the fore. It makes teaching in a differentiated manner an imperative. It also reinforces the importance of horizontal learning, in addition to vertical learning, so that students can learn from each other to enhance learning experiences that may otherwise fail to effectively engage them. A vastly different role for the teacher becomes essential. It is no longer possible for us digital immigrants to be the sole authoritative figures in class, given that at least some of our students' fluency in a new knowledge paradigm far surpasses our own. This forces us into a teaching style that actively co-opts our students and makes them active partners in mediating learning experiences. And finally, these changes in knowledge worlds bring home the need to adopt a pedagogy that does not insist on a single correct way of doing things. When we bring together these insights from the three areas of legal education, our discipline, teaching, and students, it seems to me that we have a unique opportunity in contemporary South African legal education to respond to various fundamental shifts that we witness in society around us. In my view, all of this requires legal education to change and to change radically. But as responsible intellectuals, it is our duty to drive that change in terms of proper theoretical frameworks. Thus, for change in legal education in South Africa to proceed responsibly, it must be grounded in theory. I believe that TLE can provide us with such a theoretical framework. This framework embraces transformative constitutionalism as the guiding theory to our discipline, constructivist pedagogies as directing our teaching strategies, an acknowledgement of the advent of a fundamentally different notion of knowledge brought about by the digital revolution. Neil Gold states that law teaches us ways of behaving are meta statements about law, lawyering, and justice to our students. He thus concludes that consciousness about teaching makes it more likely that we will be intentional in respect of both content and form in our instruction. This is what I consider transformative legal education to be. And I think that this can provide us with the opportunity to contribute as law teachers to the transformative project of our Constitution. Thank you.